Hey guys, it's Mrs. Allward, and we are going to cover profit margin this week. I have it broken down into two different lessons because there's a lot of different parts that go along with it. So we are going to have lesson 9.2a and lesson 9.2b. So here we go with the first part. The first part is going to cover gross profit margin and net profit margin. Here we go. If a clothing store buys a dress for $45, it marks it up to $75 and sells it at a markdown price of $65. At first glance, this looks profitable. There appears to be a $20 profit. This $20 is called the gross profit, the difference between what the item costs and what it is sold for. But of course, it's not that simple. The store has plenty of other overhead expenses: rent, utilities, salaries, financial costs, advertising expenses, etc. When calculating how much prices should be marked up or how much room the business has to mark them down without losing money, management can't forget about these other costs. Gross profit does not take them into account. On the other hand, net profit takes into account all the expenses of doing business and is a much better measure of the actual amount earned. So, some more specific definitions. Profit margin is the profit expressed as a percent of the selling price, sometimes just called the margin. The gross profit margin is based on the gross profit before expenses. And the net profit margin is based on the net profit or after the expenses. So to calculate our gross profit margin, we have this formula. We're going to take our sales and minus the cost. And after we have that difference, we're going to divide the sales. And then we're going to turn it into a percent by multiplying by 100. So here we go. Our first example, it says Fantastic Fashion sells a dress that costs $45 for $65. So this is the sale price. Find the gross profit margin for the sale. So remember, we're going to do sale price minus cost divided by sale price times 100. So we're going to do 65 minus 45 divided by 65 times 100. So what does that look like on our calculators? Okay, we're going to do 65 minus 45, hit enter. So that difference is the $20 divided by 65. And now we can multiply by 100 to turn it into a percent. Make sure that you hit enter after your subtraction before you divide, or else it won't work out properly. Okay, so we're going to round to two decimal places. Remember, we always round to two decimal places unless it rounds up and you end up having a zero here, and you don't need to show me that zero. So it's going to be 30.77%. And that's our gross profit margin before we take into account our expenses. Let's practice that one more time. So last year, so for the whole year, sales at Fantastic Fashions totaled $219,540. The cost of the merchandise sold was $147,470. What was the gross profit margin? So the first example was based on one dress. This second example is based on a whole year's worth of sales, and you can do it both ways. So here we go. So sales minus cost divided by sales times 100. All right, so let's see what our calculator tells us. Let's move that over. So 219,540 minus 147,470. Hit enter. We have our difference. Then we're going to divide by the 219,540. and we can times by 100 to get it into percents. Make sure you round to 2 decimal places, so we get 32.83%. And that is gross profit margin. Net profit margin has to take in our expenses. So, how good is a 32.83% gross profit margin? The answer really depends on how much overhead the dress shop has to cover. If expenses run at 20% of overall sales, a 32.83% gross profit margin is more than enough to cover that and leave a net profit. On the other hand, if expenses run 40% of sales, this would not be enough to cover costs, resulting in a loss overall. So, we're going to look at two situations, one where they have a positive net profit margin, meaning they've earned money, and one where they have a negative net profit margin, which means they've lost money. So, in order to find our expenses as a percent of sales, we're going to do our expenses divided by sales times by 100. And then to find our net profit margin, we're going to take our gross profit margin that we did on the previous page and then subtract our expenses as a percent of sales. All right, so here we go. So 3 years ago, sales at Fantastic Fashions totaled $209,450. The cost of their merchandise sold was $149,470, and they had overhead expenses totaling $63,073. So this is our sales, this was our cost, this was our expenses. So first we got to find our gross profit margin. Sales minus cost over sales times 100, like we just got done doing. All right, so sales, 209, 450, minus our cost, 149, 470, divided by our sales. So when we do that, and times by 100, I apologize. So when you plug that into your calculator, you're going to get 28.64%. Then we're going to calculate our expenses as a percent of sales. So we're going to do expenses divided by sales times by 100. So our expenses are 63,073. And then we're going to divide by our sales, the 209,450 times by 100. And when you do that, you'll get 25.34%. And to find our net profit margin, we're going to do our gross profit margin minus our expense as a percent of sales. So 28.64% minus 25.34%, and that gives us 3.3%. Not a lot, but they're making a little bit of money. 2 years ago, Fantastic Fashions had sales totaling $153,670. The cost of goods sold was $118,945. And then our expenses totaled $57,950. So we're going to find our gross profit margin, our expenses as a percent of sales, and then we have to continue on to the next page to find our net profit. Okay, so again, gross profit margin. That's our sales minus cost divided by sales times 100. So 153,670 minus our cost, 118,945, divided by the sales, 153,670, times by 100. You plug it into the calculator, you're going to get 22.6%. That's going to round up to one decimal place. Expenses as a percent of sale. Remember, we're going to do expenses divided by sales times 100. So our expenses, 57,950 divided by 153,670. 670 times 100, and that gives us 37.71%. So our expense percent is higher than our gross profit margin. So that's not looking good. So on the next page, to find our net profit margin, we're going to take our gross profit margin, the 22.6%, minus our expense percent, which was our 37.71%, and that gives us negative 15.1%. They didn't make enough money. So a negative net profit margin indicates that the business lost money. That is no bueno for this company. All right. If you have questions on gross profit margin and net profit margin, please let me know. You can email me or you can hop on to office hours through Google Meet and let me know what I can help you with. All right. So pick up in the next lesson on more with profit margin. Talk to you guys later. Bye.